All right, everybody. Looks like they're going to a short break right there. They will be calling another rebuttal witness. Again, I'm here right now with my new guest for the day, editor of Law and Crime, Rachel Stockman. Rachel, I haven't had a chance to talk to you about this, okay?
Yes.
You're split one way or another? You think Dietrich, George Burch, one way or another?
I think that Burch probably did it. However, I think there's probably some reasonable doubt, maybe in at least one of the jurors' minds. I don't think that Burch's testimony that we heard all yesterday was very convincing, and here's why. On its surface, maybe I believe him. He seems like, you know, a decent, hardworking Green Bay guy. Well, I guess he's not from the Wisconsin area originally. But we got to think, what do we have to back up his story? And there's basically nothing that backs up his story, except maybe that babysitter who said, you know, Dietrich said some sketchy things. But I'm really having trouble backing up his story, and I think the jurors are going to as well.
I agree with you. I think it's interesting when you hear his background, you hear where he's from, and that was important to hear, right? That was important to hear, make him a human.
Right. That was the whole point. We all thought it went on too long, introducing what he did, where he was from, how he got to Wisconsin.
But we have people who are in this studio and people in our set who were like, I see this guy. I don't think he did it. But as the story developed, what do we know? What evidence do we have that Douglas Dietrich was in the back of his Blazer? What evidence do we have that he followed him into that field where the body was found? What evidence do we have? We know the Fitbit data doesn't match up, so that's the question.
Right. I mean, there's just no evidence backing up his story, and I think that's what's going to hang up the jurors. However, you got to look on the flip side. Is there enough evidence to convict him? Well, you have cell phone data, you have his own testimony saying he was there. There's a lot. So it's really going to come down, this whole case is going to come down to questioning whether he was telling the truth on the stand or not. And I think that there were some major indications that he was not. Okay, sorry.
You know, my question was, under cross-examination, you got a little testy. You got a little angry. I don't think that boded well for him for the jury.
No, because it showed that he did get angry. It showed he had a temper, and it showed he could explode. In situations like this, you want to tell your client, if you're the attorney, keep it cool. Stay in control. Don't show the jurors that you can get easily ruffled or upset. At the same time, I could also see it that this is a man literally fighting for his freedom, and he wants to put up a fight. So I see both sides. At the end of the day, he didn't come off great during cross-examination.
Yeah, because the other way is looking at it. Here's the state. I keep telling them Douglas Dietrich did it. They won't listen to me. They put me on trial. Maybe he's angry. Then again, the story just doesn't quite follow. But we can't forget the fact the jury now knows he was convicted 5 times in the past. And we know this because it had to be presented to try and show, I didn't want to report what happened to me here because I was on probation. Right. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, that definitely hurts his story, and I think the jurors are going to be considering that too. This was a guy that got into trouble with the law on multiple occasions. He's not some squeaky clean guy with a great reputation besides all that we heard yesterday about his story, et cetera, et cetera. So I do want to meet that person in our studio and have them on here that believes that George Burch is innocent.
Well, we'll have to see what the verdict is, and maybe we'll bring them in. Again, we were talking about the George Burch case. They are, as soon as we are coming back from this commercial break, we'll go back into the courtroom. There's a lot at stake for everyone involved in this case, not just George Burch, but the family of Nicole Vanderheiden, as well as Douglas Dietrich. As I said, we'll take a quick break. We'll be back in a minute. You stay tuned. You don't want to miss anything. Welcome back to Law and Crime Live, everybody. We're covering the George Burch case out of Wisconsin. On the stand right now, we have a live feed, is Tyler Bailing. He's the forensic crime analyst who was called earlier in the case. He's being called as a rebuttal witness right now to talk about the images that were stored on Douglas Dietrich's phone. And the reason this matters is there were 2 images, 2 satellite images of where Nicole Vanderheiden's body was found, which begs the question, why would he have those images? Let's listen in.
Bailing, thank you. You may step down again. Any other rebuttal witnesses, Attorney Lassay?
No, Your Honor.
Okay. Any witnesses from the defense?
No, thank you.
All right. Ladies and gentlemen, we've put in a good half a morning, and both parties have now concluded with the presentation of their evidence. So we're going to take our mid-morning break. We have to, we had our instruction conference, informal instruction conference at the end of the evening, or at the end of the day, yesterday. We have to go over that again formally this morning. It shouldn't take that long. I anticipate we'll be, the court will be giving you the legal instructions soon, and then we'll, I think, go right into our closing arguments. So I'm kind of giving you a heads up that we'll probably be out here in court through the noon hour. So we'll give you a little extra break at this time, and when we're ready to go back on the record, we'll bring you back into the courtroom, all right?
All rise.
Well, you heard it. The presentation of the evidence in this case is done. All that remains are jury instructions, and closing arguments. Again, I'm here with Editor-in-Chief of Law and Crime, Rachel Stockman. Okay, they finished their case, the rebuttal witnesses. Let's just talk real quick about that last one. Tyler Bailing, a forensic crime analyst. Why does it really matter if Douglas Dietrich had those images on his phone?
Okay, so when I first heard the defense's witness, this criminal investigator who took the stand this morning, I said, wow, she found 2 images of where Nicole's body was found on Doug Dietrich's phone. This is incredibly incriminating. Why would this man have 2 photos of where Nicole's body was found? Okay, well, come to find out, the prosecution did a very, very good job explaining that he had 1,800 images cached on his phone. It was not clear when this image was loaded up, and he's in the construction real estate business, so it wouldn't be entirely unusual that he would have maps of the surrounding area. I was convinced.
Yeah. Well, it's something the jury is going to have to weed their way through, this evidence. And one of the things they're going to have to weed their way through is the testimony of George Burch. Remember, the defendant took the stand yesterday. I want to continue playing for you his testimony that you may have missed. So let's listen in again to what his version of the events it was. Let's listen in.
He was towards the rear of the vehicle, but he wasn't right at the rear of the vehicle.
He was parallel to the vehicle. And I was up here, he was standing back here, I was up here reaching in the vehicle, and he was standing catty corner from me.
Did you, I guess, how did you get her out of the vehicle?
I had to pretty much grab her arms or under her arm area and pull her across the seat.
Was that somewhat difficult?
Yes, sir.
Why?
It's pretty much dead weight.
Were you eventually able to get her out of the vehicle?
It took me a moment, but yes.
And did you say that the way you grabbed her, did you reach into the vehicle and were you able to pick her up, or did you
Kind of pulled her to the edge, and then I put my arm under her again, and then kind of scooped, kind of carried her again with where she would be in my arms, I guess is the best way to describe it.
So going by your arm position there, it looks as though you're holding basically her entire body at one point.
Yes, sir.
With one arm, I guess, by her upper body, and then where would your other arm be?
Towards her, like, knee, thigh area, calf area.
What was Dietrich doing at this point?
He was standing behind me with he still had the firearm in his hands, pretty much directing me what to do.
And what was that?
He had backed up and he had told me to come down, and it's like I don't know if it'd be considered a ravine. It's not like really steep, but it's one form we call them a ditch, but I don't know like what you would call it here. But it's just like a little sloped area, and at the bottom there was tall grass, just bunch of brush, shrubs, I guess, different types of wild growth.
Were you able to continue carrying her that whole time?
For the most part, it was kind of awkward because when you're carrying someone, and I guess and they know they're being, it's a lot easier to control their weight. But at this point, it was kind of like everything was kind of loose and all over, all over the place. So it was kind of hard. So I was kind of almost stumbling a little bit trying to keep the balance of it.
Okay, so that's George Burch explaining how he was moving Nicole's body out of the car while he was being held at gunpoint by Nicole's boyfriend, Douglas Dietrich. Now you're hearing about how he disposed of the body or moved the body into that field where she was eventually found. What I'm going to play for you right now is how George Burch escaped this situation. Let's listen in.
Thank you, Your Honor. George, we left off, I guess, when you were at the field that we now know is off Hoffman Avenue. So let's just pick up where we left off. Essentially, at some point, you said you could no longer carry Nicole, and her legs, I guess, went down to the ground.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Sorry.
And at that point, you were then, I guess, pulling her by her armpits.
Like I said, I was pretty much in the vicinity of where I was told to go with her at the time. So when I dropped her, I didn't do much moving after that.
And what made you think you were getting into the vicinity where she was supposed to be?
I went to the area where I had been told to go, and he had stopped in front of me in the area, so I was facing him. He was 5 feet roughly, not exact, but he was about 5 feet away from me, 6 feet away from me roughly. And he was in front of me. I'd say he was at 1 o'clock.
So keep walking us through that. What happened next?
Pretty much I was advised to put her down. At this time, he was kind of like looking around motion, kind of, I don't know if he was taking in, if he heard something or if he was looking like around just to take in what was going on around him, or looking to see if, I don't know if somebody could see us or what was going on at that time. But that was the motion that he was making at the time.
What happened next?
He was in the vicinity of me, and the whole time I'm trying to figure out a way to remove myself from the situation or get out of this situation, or what I can do to do it. When I noticed, because up until this time, he had been either in a direction where I could not face him or get to him, or he was far enough away from me, but he was constantly watching me the whole time, or constantly paying attention on my movements and what I was doing. At this time, when I seen him kind of look away or not pay direct attention to me, was when I kind of went like this to draw his attention more to what was going on than to me. And when I did, Nicole kind of flipped over like this way. Her feet were more ahead of her, and flipped over. And when he kind of paid attention to what was going on at that time, that's when I turned, and with everything I had, I lunged at him and pushed him as hard as I possibly could at that time.
fall down?
I don't know. He stumbled backwards. Did he fall down? I don't know. Because I broke forward.
What'd you do?
Hauled ass to my car. Or my truck.
That's George Burch, the defendant, testifying on his own behalf in his murder trial, talking about when he was able to escape that situation. And that situation is where Douglas Dietrich, Nicole Vanderheiden, the victim in this case, her boyfriend, forced him at gunpoint to dispose of her body. And you see the photo of them right there. That's Douglas Dietrich and Nicole. And again, the defense is claiming, George Burch is claiming that Douglas Dietrich is the one that killed Nicole. So, Rachel, my question for you is, as we're watching this, he was in a bad situation, according to him. He was able to escape. He's able to remember certain details. We talked about this kind of the break, but he's not able to remember other details.
Right. So one of the things that we picked up on was the fact, you know, he remembers, and we didn't play a lot of it because it's very graphic. He remembers the sex he had with Nicole down to the detail, where her legs were positioned, where he was positioned. But he can't seem to remember whether or not he wore a condom during this encounter. That's weird, okay?
And it's important because the prosecution wanted to press the fact that this seemed to be a sexual assault, that she didn't want this.
Right, and he's saying the whole time, of course, that this is consensual. He admits, no, it was not gentle sex, but the two of them wanted to do this. But it's just kind of weird how he conveniently forgets some parts of the story. It's also weird that they would drive back to Nicole's house that night. Why would they drive back to Nicole's house?
So the theory was they tried to go to his house. Remember, he shared the house with Ed Jackson, but when they showed up, Ed Jackson's father was in a robe.
Okay, but Nicole knows that her newborn baby is home with her babysitter, and her live-in boyfriend lives at that house. Why would she bring a new lover, one-night stand guy to her house? I mean, even if that's the only place she could think of, it just would make absolutely no sense.
No sense.
I still don't know why they ended up there. I guess it must have been Burch's idea, but parts of the story are just perplexing.
According to Burch, he said he didn't make the decisions in this case.
Right, that she directed him.
It was all up to Nicole, and we are talking about that mother who was killed, and it becomes the question about who does the jury believe, because all they have to do is, the defense just has to convince one juror, and he will not be sentenced, he will not be convicted. It's a really interesting case. They're on break right now. We expect for the rest of the day that there will be jury instructions from the judge to the jury about how they will deliberate, and there will also be closing arguments, both by the state and the defense. And that is a way for them to summarize about everything you've heard, and more importantly, what the jury has heard. And you know the defense is going to summarize what George Burch testified to. When we come back from our break, we're going to keep playing for you George Burch's testimony from yesterday, because in a way, the whole case rests on his testimony. Whether or not those jurors believe him, that becomes the question. Was he believable? Was he likable? What was his demeanor? Those are all the questions. We'll take a quick break. We'll be back in a minute. You want to stay tuned. Welcome back to Law and Crime Live, everybody. We are covering the George Burch case out of Wisconsin. We're keeping a careful eye on the courtroom for the live feed to start up again. They're in a break right now after the defense and the state have both rested the evidentiary portion of the case. All that remains is the jury instructions, the judge instructing the jury on how they're supposed to deliberate, and also the closing arguments by both the state and the defense summarizing both of their cases. What we're doing for you right now is replaying George Burch's testimony from yesterday, the defendant in this murder case. Again, he is charged with the murder of 31-year-old Nicole Vanderheiden. And he is charged because his DNA evidence is all over her. Also, data from his cell phone indicates he was in 4 key locations that night, including the crime scene where we believe Nicole was murdered, where her body was found, and also, listen to this, where her clothing and purse were found on the side of the road. We can track his location. Now, the reason we're showing you his testimony is because the defense's whole theory rests around what George Burch said. And he said that he wasn't the one that killed Nicole, but that it was Douglas Dietrich, Nicole's boyfriend. What we're up to right now is when George Burch was able to escape from Douglas Dietrich. So if you recall, as we've been talking about all this morning, after having sex with Nicole, he was knocked in the head by Douglas Dietrich at gunpoint. Douglas killed Nicole, forced George to drive Nicole's body to a field. He wanted him to dump the body out, but right then, George was able to escape, and he jumped back into his car after pushing Doug, and I want to play for you right now when he jumped back in the car. Take a look.
How far were you from it?
I'd say 10, 15 feet maybe give or take a little bit.
Keep walking us through that. What happened next?
I jumped in the vehicle, started it, and I remember trying to take off, but when I took off, if you slam it down too fast, it doesn't lock and drive. So I actually ended up slamming it down to a lower gear at first, because I remember when I turned off, I came around and went to the dirt road, and I remember it was bucking. I couldn't figure out what was going until I had enough. I noticed that it wasn't in drive. That was the whole reason why I couldn't go, like really go anywhere.
Did you floor it when you got into it?
Not essentially. I didn't stomp on the gas. No.
Was there a reason for that?
Just I wanted to be able to take off, and I knew that if you stomp it, I'm in dirt. I don't know I'm gonna be able to take off. Like I didn't. Sometimes it just bogs right down. It's not going to go anywhere.
And then you said, when did you realize that you were in a lower gear and not drive?
Excuse me. I'm sorry.
When did you realize you were in a lower gear and not in drive?
After, because I was facing towards the driveway. So once I really got to the driveway and kind of went at an angle out of there, I couldn't, like you could feel it kind of like it wasn't going like it was supposed to. And that's when I realized, like as I was turn off the dirt road, that I wasn't in drive.
Okay. So did you put it in drive?
Yes, sir.
And then did you get back on the paved road?
Yes, sir.
And at that point, what was going through your mind?
A lot of stuff. Fear, adrenaline. Wasn't sure what had just happened. Was somewhat glad that I was out of that situation. But kind of still freaked out, I guess would be the best way to describe it.
So what'd you do next?
I remember eventually I actually lit a cigarette, trying to calm down because I didn't know nothing. I didn't know my environment. I didn't know where I was, and I just wanted to get out of there. I just wanted to get.
That's the defendant, George Burch, testifying yesterday on his own behalf in his murder trial of Nicole Vanderheiden. We're keeping a very close eye right now in the courtroom, the live feed in the Wisconsin courtroom. As soon as trial starts up again, we'll make sure to go to it. But we are recapping what you may have missed in this case. Again, I'm here with Editor-in-Chief of Law and Crime, Rachel Stockman. We talk about George Burch testifying and basically pointing the finger at Douglas Dietrich as the killer. Are you surprised today, when the state had the ability to call rebuttal witnesses, that they didn't call Douglas Dietrich back to the stand to refute what George Burch said?
That's an interesting question. I was kind of thinking they might, but if they had, it could ended up backfiring on them, because I think that Douglas Dietrich was not the best witness on the stand. He wasn't totally believable. And then you had some of the issues when we had the defense call that babysitter who said that Douglas Dietrich said this story that Nicole had bumped her head at the bar that night. So I think that probably the risk of what he would say outweighed him being called back to the stand, I think.
That's a very good point, and also the fact that maybe they felt they didn't need to. Maybe they feel that no one's going to believe George Burch's story, that he was the victim in this case. Let's continue on with his story. So now you know that he drove away. What happened next? Let's show you.
Home or somewhere safe.
So what'd you do?
I actually had to pull out my phone, and the Samsung has a button on it that you press the button and you say, "Hey Google," and then you tell them what you want. And I told them to give me directions on how to get back to 912 South Greenwood.
Do you remember where you were when you asked your phone for directions?
I have not a clue.
Did your phone end up giving you directions?
Yes, sir.
Did you follow those directions?
Yes, sir. It'll, if you enable it, which I've always had it, it talks to you, so you don't even like have to look at it.
You said you were smoking a cigarette?
I don't remember if I still was or not. I remember that somewhere in that time I had smoked a cigarette or was smoking a cigarette. They were in my center console.
You remember doing anything else on your drive home?
What do you mean?
On your way home, do you remember doing anything else while you were driving?
I remember looking over and seeing some stuff that was hers sitting in the vehicle.
Do you remember if this stuff was in the front or the back seat?
I don't remember exactly where it all was. I knew that it was multiple of things. It wasn't just like one item.
What would you do with it?
Honestly, I freaked out and I threw it out the window.
Do you remember if
Okay, did you just hear that? I hope that you did. George Burch took all of Nicole's belongings, her purse, her clothing, and threw it on the outside while he was driving. Now, that explains a lot of things because we know from his cell phone data that he was pinged to the location where her clothing and purse was found. Now, people could hear that and say, oh, that makes sense according to his story, or they could look at it the other way and say, how convenient. Well, we know that he drove home, so what happened when he finally did get home? Let's listen in.
which window you threw it out of?
It was the passenger side. I don't remember if it was the front passenger or the side passenger. The Blazer's not that huge of a vehicle, so literally I can reach to the back window.
Do you remember if, I guess, was there a lot of stuff? Did you make multiple throws? Do you remember any of that?
I remember, well, as far as I can remember, I made 2 throws. I don't remember being more than that, but it could have been. I can't say for certain. Like I said, I was completely razzled.
After that, did you, I guess, go home?
Eventually, yes, sir.
What'd you do when you got home?
I went in the house, honestly, and took a shower and washed it. I had blood on me, on my hands and on me from where I'd carried her.
Did you have blood on your clothes?
I believe so, yes, sir.
What'd you do with your clothes?
I took a shower, I ended up washing my clothes.
Is anybody awake when you got home?
No, sir.
Were you bleeding?
Not anywhere that I found, no, sir.
Over the course of this process, taking a shower, doing your laundry, were you in pain?
I noticed when I was washing my hair that my back part right here roughly was sore. I wouldn't say like excruciating pain or anything, but I noticed it was sore, like I had bumped my head or something.
Was there a cut?
No.
Were you bleeding?
No, sir.
What'd you do after you got out of the shower?
I went upstairs into my room, and I remember the house that I'm in it's an older house, and there's like plaster stencils on the ceiling, and I remember sitting there just like trying to replay things that had happened over the night and wondering like what in the hell has just happened? What just went on? Trying to just piece it all together. Was it just a nightmare, or just what?
Then what?
Eventually I ended up passing out because everything had, for a while when your adrenaline was rushing and everything was going on, it seemed like everything was moving so fast, but at the same time it was moving really slow, and almost in slow motion. And then once I had a chance to actually sit there
That's
for a
George
second.
Burch, the defendant who testified yesterday. We're waiting for a live feed back in that courtroom. As soon as we have it, we'll make sure to go to it. Rachel, here's my problem, okay? For all the people that believe George Burch is innocent people don't do what he did. They don't go home, they don't shower, they don't wash their clothes. What am I not getting here?
Well, that's exactly when we get to the cross-examination of this witness, that's exactly what the prosecutors hammered in. They said, okay, wait a second. So you were forced into this whole situation where you had to carry Nicole's body, dispose of it. But then when you were freed from this situation and you saw the clothes in your car, why didn't you at that point call 911? Why didn't you do anything? And his answer there basically is, and that what he told prosecutors, oh, I was so frazzled, I'd never been in a situation like this, I was panicked. So you throw the clothes out the window?
And you wash your own clothes and take a shower.
That minute, that night.
That's the problem. That's the problem here, is the fact that you can say anybody is in a situation, okay, you need a minute to digest, but you eventually tell the police. You don't keep it a secret from your friends either.
Well, and of course, the reason he says he was because he was wanted on, was it armed robbery?
Grand larceny.
Grand
He was
larceny.
worried about, he's on probation. We'll get into that in a minute about his reasons for not contacting anybody, but from a common sense perspective, and that's really what you're looking at, is common sense. You have a couple of common sense jurors about what, are they going to look at this and say, this is a normal behavior, or is this somebody that's hiding something? We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we have a lot more to discuss in the George Burch case. See you soon. Welcome back to Law and Crime Live, everybody. We're covering the George Burch case out of Wisconsin. We're carefully monitoring our feed in that courtroom. And what we can tell you right now is the judge is going over the jury instructions with the attorneys. This is outside the presence of the jury. They're not there. They're working on the actual language in the jury instructions. And let me tell you something. That battle between the attorneys about that specific language, that is important. They really, really want to articulate each one of those definitions and each one of those legal terms precisely, because the jury, they will use that in their deliberations. What we're showing you right now is the testimony of George Burch, the defendant in this case, and he testified yesterday. And what he said was he was not the one that killed 31-year-old Nicole Vanderheiden, but it was Douglas Dietrich, her boyfriend. Now, what we've been playing you is pretty much his whole testimony about what happened that night. And where we're at right now, he escaped from the clutches, I should say, of Douglas Dietrich. He was able to push him away and run away, got in his car and drove home. What we just played for you is when he got home, he showered, he changed his clothes, he washed his clothes, but he didn't call the police and he didn't tell anybody about what he had just experienced. I want to play for you right now what happened after all that. Take a look.
It was just like completely draining. Like everything had just, I mean, you feel this overwhelming exhaustion.
What's the next thing you remember?
I want to say it was Ed waking me up, or waking up. Someone hearing a noise or something, waking up.
Okay, and then what happened?
I remember Ed saying, "Come on, we had to leave." We had to go and get gas, and then we were heading for the fishing trip.
And that's when you went to Racine
Yes, sir.
and you went fishing.
Yes, sir.
You didn't call 911.
No, sir.
You didn't call Jordan.
No, sir.
You didn't tell Ed.
No, sir.
You went fishing.
Yes, sir.
Why would you not tell someone what you just went through?
One, I didn't even know who to talk to. I didn't. How do you have a conversation with someone about something like that? Like, what do you say? I grew up an only child, and I've experienced a lot of things that sometimes you just keep them inside. And it just, now I see that it's completely wrong, and I should have said something or should have done something. But in the time, I kind of imploded and kept everything inside.
Help me understand this, George. Why would you not call the cops?
I was scared to speak to the cops.
Why?
I was on probation.
What were you on probation for?
Grand larceny.
What's that?
It's pretty much simple theft.
So you were on probation for theft of property,
Yes, sir.
and that played into why you didn't speak to the cops?
Yes, sir.
Well, what would have happened? I mean, what were you afraid of?
5 years in prison. At minimum. The suspended time was like it's roughly about 5 years.
Why didn't you tell Ed?
I honestly don't. I don't know why I didn't say anything. I don't know if it was just where I'm from.
So according to George Burch, the reason he didn't tell police that Douglas Dietrich, Nicole Vanderheiden's boyfriend, killed her and that he forced him at gunpoint to move her body was because he was on probation and that he was afraid of getting in trouble. Rachel, is that a believable response for at least one juror?
Okay, I think that whole interaction obviously had been so rehearsed by the defense attorney and the defendant. I could just see them going this over and over again, you know, in the defense attorney's office. Okay, I'm going to ask you this. This is what you're going to say. He tried to seem genuine. He was so upset. Who was I going to tell? I mean, is it a believable defense? I guess. For why he didn't call the cops, but like, this is a young woman's life. What about the woman's family? Did any of that occur to him? And it doesn't seem like it did. Maybe he's just an awful person and was just thinking about himself. That could be the case. But I have a lot of questions about that.
I think a lot of people have a lot of questions about that. And we're not the only ones, Rachel, because you know who else had questions about it? The state, when they had the opportunity to cross-examine him. And let me tell you something. It got very heated. Let's play some of that for you right now.
You don't talk. You don't tell about things you've seen. You don't tell on people. People get killed all the time where I'm from for that. And I feared for my own safety if I would have ever said anything because, like I said, where I'm from, it happens all the time. People go to tell on people and tell things, and they end up dead. They never make it to court. They never make it anywhere. They find them dead.
Did you follow this case on the news?
Yes, sir.
What did you learn from the news?
That the body had been found, and inevitably, or after the next couple of days, that Doug had been arrested.
You still didn't come forward with information?
No, sir. At that point, my reasoning was still somewhat the same, but in my opinion, they had the person that had done it, and I figured that they would see that and they would know that.
When did you learn that Doug was released?
I never did until I was arrested.
George, did you murder Nicole Vanderheiden?
No, sir. Definitely not.
Do you know who did?
Doug Dietrich.
I have no further questions. Thanks, George.
Cross-examination.
Mr. Burch, you said the first time that you learned that Doug Dietrich had been released was on the day that you were arrested?
I believe so, yes, sir.
Okay, so George Burch said he didn't do it, that Douglas Dietrich did. The cross-examination was pretty heated. The state wasn't going to let him rest with that. Let's listen in.
After you are making out with Nicole in the front seat, you at some point moved to the back seat of the car, correct?
Yes, sir.
And you walk around to the passenger side of the vehicle to the back seat, is that
Yes,
right?
sir.
And you don't remember how Nicole got into the back seat?
I don't remember if she got out and got into the back or if she just climbed over the center console and got into the back. There's no way I could climb to the back
Why'd you walk around to the passenger side?
because I'm big and I wouldn't fit that easily behind the driver's seat.
So the driver's seat had been pushed all the way back?
I don't know if it was all the way back, but I can barely fit in the car as it is, and if it had been moved at all, I wouldn't be able to fit back there.
But Doug fit back there just fine.
I believe so. I'm just fine. I don't know. You'd have to ask him about that.
You said that you were having sexual intercourse with Nicole while she was in the backseat of that car, right?
Eventually, yes, sir.
And what did she tell you about how painful it was?
She didn't express that she was in any pain at all.
You were here through Dr. Rogalska's testimony about the contusions and abrasions on her mons pubis, right?
Yes, sir.
About the contusions on the vestibule, her urethral orifice, those contusions. Remember that?
Yes, sir.
The contusions on her lower vaginal vault, you remember that, right?
Yes, sir.
Blood in her vaginal vault, you remember that?
I believe so.
Deep, soft tissue contusions to her mons pubis and abrasions to her left breast. You heard the doctor explain those injuries and explain that they would be painful injuries, even if they were consensual. You heard that, right?
I believe that's what you said, but I'm not sure.
Caused by penetration.
Correct.
Rough sex or forcible sex? That becomes the question for the jury. Rachel, how do you think the state did on cross-examining him about that point?
I think they did an excellent job as the prosecutor listed those injuries. It's hard to imagine that this is something someone consensually wanted to have happen to them. Specifically, the abrasions to her breasts. I mean, how did that happen if that wasn't forceful? I think jurors are going to be asking that question.
Right, because we can look at her and say that she had, first of all, his DNA was everywhere. There was evidence that this was not pleasant.
Well, he said it was not gentle.
Not gentle.
That was the term he
Convenient
used.
to say that when he's in a murder case.
Exactly. I mean, you got to consider all of the evidence here. Not only are we dealing with a murder, you have this extremely rough sex that happened before it. And for him to cast this aside like it was some kind of consensual thing is very hard to believe.
I know. Rachel, as we end the day here, because we believe later on today they will have the closing arguments, what do you think each side needs to do?
Well, I think absolutely the prosecution just has to destroy George Burch's story. They need to go piece by piece through every element of that story and say, this is why it didn't happen this way. Once they do that, I think they're going to have a pretty good job at convincing the jurors that he's guilty. But we'll see.
And the defense, real quick?
Well, the defense needs to keep trying to prove that there is some evidence there that backs up George Burch's story. I don't think there's a ton, but they have some. So there you go.
We'll have to see. Rachel Stockman, editor-in-chief of Law&Crime, thank you so much for joining me.
Absolutely.
Now, Rachel's going to be taking over the hosting chair because we are going to continue our coverage of this case on lawandcrime.com. We're going to be signing off here on Crime and Investigation. Thank you so much for joining us today. A really big case we've been covering here, and you're not going to want to miss anything. We'll be back tomorrow at 9 a.m. We're going to continue our coverage of this case and other legal stories.